Okay, tonight we have one of our staff from the Crawfordsville District Public Library, Stephanie Morrissette, and she is our arborist. Is that what, kind of like a forester? And she's worked with state, different parks and stuff, and she's going to be doing our program tonight.
Hi, thanks for having me here tonight. Again, Deli said my name is Steph Morrissette. I work in the adult services on the second floor here at the library. So Deli's been working with me. We've been doing some local history training. So I'm really excited to expand my knowledge of our local history collection. Deli came to me, I think it was back in January, and asked me if I would do a program on cemetery plants. And I thought that was actually a really fascinating idea because I have thought about that myself in visiting, just liking cemeteries, liking the historical significance of cemeteries. My husband and I would like to visit different cemeteries. But I noticed there was a recurring theme of a lot of the cemetery plants that I was noticing. So when Deli brought this topic up, I thought, well, maybe we'll have a program here that might spark some interest in cemetery plantings. With that said, I do encourage you throughout the program, if you have any questions, go ahead and just stick your hand up and let me know, because I won't remember my own questions till the end of the program. So please, if you have your own questions, just tag me as we go and we'll address them then. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. Can everyone hear me okay? Everyone can hear me okay, great. So tonight we're going to talk about woody landscape plants of early 19th century Indiana cemeteries. And we will focus on talking a little bit about the history, the significance of cemeteries, and then the significance of landscape plantings, as well as the symbolism of those plants, what they meant to various peoples and cultures, what they were used for in day-to-day life, what they may have been used for ethnobotanically, as well as some of their identifying characteristics. We're going to kind of cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time tonight. All right, so historically, cemeteries prior to 1830, it happened during the territorial expansion. We know everybody kind of is making that big migration out west during the 1700s and the first part of the 1800s. So that's when cemeteries, the older, more historical cemeteries, pioneer cemeteries, if you will, became established. Historically, they've been called graveyards, and that was usually due to the fact that they were adjacent to a place of worship or some sort of structure similar to that. Logistically speaking, over time, they had to move cemeteries away from more civilized settlements for sanitary reasons and other purposes. But the term cemetery came into popular use back in about the 1830s, so when the Victorian era started and the first of the rural cemetery movement began. That was when the cemetery came into popular terminology, and it's actually Greek for sleeping chamber or dormitory. So it shifted that paradigm away from death as a negative connotation to bringing it more into a positive aspect over time. And then later on, as the rural cemetery movement progressed on into the late 1800s and early 1900s, there was a shift away from, again, cemeteries being mourning places to actually becoming recreational destinations. So this whole movement of being buried in nature was a theme that really kicked in during that period of time.
Could you elaborate on the recreational
Yes,
term?
Absolutely. Yes, so the recreational aspect of visiting cemeteries that came about during the rural cemetery movement was they took the punitive aspect of death away and put remembrance into the cemeteries by planting these plants that have the different symbolisms that we'll talk about. And so they became a place not only where you could go to remember the dead and the deceased and connect with your own genealogy and your own people and your own history, but you could see how plants played a large part in their day-to-day lives. Did that help answer your question?
Well, I'm wondering, when I hear the word recreational, I think about coming and having picnics.
That's exactly right. You're exactly right. And those were the words I used in the book, Grave Landscapes, which we have a copy of here in our collection. I think it's checked out right now. But it does talk about those recreational destinations being having a picnic in the cemetery after church, going on Monday afternoon to fish in the pond that's adjacent to our gravesite. So they were used for more than just a picnic, more than just remembrance. They also had a functionality of, you could do different things there, fish, relax, read a book, visit your loved ones. So it kind of became an all-encompassing, it was actually, and what it was, it really was the precursor to the national park movement, which the first national parks came in the 1872, I believe, was when the first national park was formed. So it kind of elaborated on that movement of let's preserve our native environments, our natural environments. And so, yeah, so it kind of went from there.
That's amazing.
Did that help? All right. So as you know, all of your genealogists, your local historians, you know what cemeteries are for. You know that it preserves the history of the people. You know that it will preserve the legacy of the deceased, as well as the identity of the descendants. So cemeteries can tell you a lot about a people, whether it's their social values, their culture, their identity, their monetary status, their economic status. But there was also a lot of religious significance towards death, the deceased, or memorializing them. And as we know, as we've been focusing on, burial landscapes are typically found in nature, right? So landscape plants, what's the history of cemetery landscape plants? We keep talking about history, we keep talking about symbology, we keep talking about all these things. But what's important to remember about these cemetery landscape plantings were that they represented not only family and creation, but the tree of life. And so not only is it a physical tree of life, but it also symbolizes the tree of life. And so these different plants that we're going to discuss tonight had different importance to different cultures, whether that was indigenous Americans that were already here, or whether that was pioneers that came over from the old world to the new world and brought their plants with them. And the good thing about cemetery plantings, for the most part, is they generally renew themselves year after year, right? They keep coming back, whether it's not just the trees, but any perennial flowers that may be there that bloom year after year. So this perpetuity of continuation is coming through in the cemetery landscape plantings. And many of those species are still alive today. They're very long-lived. The first one we're going to talk about is the yew. We were having this discussion earlier about the yew tree. The yew tree is not only native to Europe, but it is now also native to North America. Most species are upwards growing upright, as you see in those two upper images. But it's thought that this tree actually was a symbol of rebirth and eternal life. But it was thought that the branches of the yew tree would deter evil ghosts and spirits. So there was this thing that, okay, the hoodoo of graveyards being scary and negative places. So let's get these yew branches, help that yew tree grow. Will deter some of those ghosts and evil spirits. But what they also thought was that the roots of the yew tree would grow down into the mouths of the dead and keep them from speaking their secrets. So a lot of coffins were also made out of yew wood, and the symbolism just kind of perpetuated. Christians believed that the heartwood, the center wood of the yew tree, it represented the blood of Christ. Everyday uses for the yew tree included making furniture or longbows, but specifically it was coffins because of their association with cemeteries. There were medicinal uses too, as you can see I've listed some right here. So different parts of these trees could be used for various ailments too. The easy thing to recognize about yew species, and some of them may be low-growing forms too, so don't think it's just the columnar variety. There are low-growing species as well. But the bark is kind of a very cinnamon red in coloration with some brown. It's flaky and slightly exfoliating. The leaves, I should say needles, excuse me. The evergreen needles, because it is an evergreen species, so it retains those needles all year, are flat and very feather-like, very smooth. They're darker green on the top, but on the underside, and unfortunately I couldn't find a picture of this, on the underside of the needle, there are two parallel pale yellow veins that run down the midrib of the needle. It has these red berries, which may look really delicious and juicy, but they're poisonous to livestock and people. So, never want to consume those. And this species is incredibly long-lived. So you can see how some of those old world species of yews coming over to the new world will still be alive today in our historical cemeteries. The cypress, we had talked about cypress earlier too. This one in particular is called the graveyard cypress. It was thought to connect heaven and earth and to unite the two together based upon its upward growth form. So it's an evergreen species that grows mostly upright, even though there are now bred varieties that are lower growing. But it was thought that the branches that grew up like this, the roots to the branches to the sky, connected the heavens and the earth. So instead of a lot of other evergreen species that their branches are kind of more downward at a deeper angle, the cypress branches went straight up. It has a really smooth feather-like appearance. You can't really tell in this image here, but if you know what snakeskin reptile scales look like, it's very reminiscent of that. They're very small and overlapping and platy. They're smooth, so they're gentle on the touch. If you ever brush up against one, it's not gonna prick your hand or anything. Most of them are columnar in form, growing upward. Down in the lower right-hand image, you can see that there is a female cone. That cone, when it's not ripe, is green. Upon maturity, it turns brown. Now, another identification characteristic are the small male cones that grow at the very tips of the needles. This is known as a monoecious species, which means that both the male and the female plants are on the same part. They're together on the same tree. And here you can see that they can live up to 4,000 years. So quite the lifespan. And yes, ma'am.
Is this evergreen or deciduous?
This is evergreen, and that leads me to my next question. If you see in the upper right-hand image, there's a very long cylindrical tree, not to be confused with the cypress. When I first saw it, that was my thought too. Oh, it's a dead cypress. There's actually a poplar tree here in the United States. It's called the black poplar. In landscaping terminology, it's also known as the Lombardy poplar. And it really had the same symbolism to it that the cypress did because of its upright growth form and the branches growing straight up. It's deciduous, meaning that it loses its leaves every year. So this was definitely a picture taken when there was no leaf on it. So you could see other species in the back of the image that did not have their leaves as well. But there are a couple evergreens there. Does that help? Red cedar was very important to indigenous Americans. It was thought that this tree's wood encapsulated the spirits of their ancestors, so it was very sacred. They would burn different parts of this tree in ceremonies in order to purify and cleanse an area of negativity. The needles, it was thought they symbolized eternal life. There were different uses for the woods. Native Americans used them for just about everything, including totem poles and ceremonial masks. The berries could be used to treat different illnesses, as well as the needles for arthritis and tuberculosis. This tree has some pretty gently upward going branches like this. The needles, however, if you see in the upper right-hand image, do look rather sharp and a little prickly, and I will tell you they are. If you've ever brushed up against one, you're, ouch, that's get you. So this is an evergreen species too. It has small, nondescript blue berries on it. I haven't heard of any purposes for the berry other than the treatment of boiling them to treat worms. I haven't heard of any like culinary uses for the berry. This is what's called an allelopathic species, which means that it, through its roots, the tree sends out chemicals that will inhibit other species of trees from growing around it. So maybe pay attention to that next time you're in a cemetery with some older species. Look around for those red cedars and see if you can see anything at all growing underneath them. So just a thought. They can live about 450 years, so again, these species can still be alive today. The white cedar, cousin to the red cedar, is native to North America, but it's actually called tree of life in Latin, which I thought was weird. It's native here. That's Latin for tree of life there. It's supposed to symbolize strength and longevity of friendship, but different parts of the white cedar were also used in protective amulets worn by Native Americans. So it was, again, a very spiritually symbolic tree to them. The wood was used from everything from canoes and rafts to baskets and shingles on pioneer homesteads. It has a very thin overlapping scale that's even softer of any of the species we've talked about so far. A lot of you recognize these. Not only are these species planted in cemeteries, whether they're columnar in form, pyramidal in shape, or a low-growing shrub, you'll recognize them in a lot of landscaping situations in yards and neighborhoods as well. They make good windbreaks. So if you see rows of white cedars lined up, probably planting for windbreak. So as you can see in the image here, there are some low-growing varieties of white cedar there. These guys are pretty long-lived too, about 1,000 years. Here I just found this image while I was researching, very fascinating, because this is a really large specimen of a white cedar tree in the cemetery here in Indiana, and I just wanted to throw that in there. They can get rather large. I couldn't estimate the age on this one. I wouldn't know where to begin because of their lifespan. I would have to know their growth rate too, just to get a better idea of how old it really is.
Did you say these are native to North America?
Most of the ones we've discussed, except for the cemetery, the cypress, the graveyard cypress.
Oh.
Yes.
So even though that's in the middle of a cemetery, it might have preceded the cemetery by
Yes.
a long time.
It could have, yes. Theoretically, that's correct. The Norway spruce is actually from Europe though, so now we're getting into a non-native species. I don't like to focus too much on non-native species, but for this program we kind of had to cover that territory since historically these different species have been so popular in plantings. This tree symbolized resilience and kindness as well as protection. The pitch or resin from this tree was actually used to seal canoes. It was used as varnish and wood for musical instruments. Different extracts from the tree, whether it was oils or the resins, could be made into treatments for various medical illnesses. What's characteristic about the Norway spruce though is pretty much once you know what you're looking at, you'll never mistake them again. You'll be able to see them from a distance and go, oh, there's that Norway spruce. So they have a very tall pyramidal form, but their branches slope downward, and then the needles are pendulous and hanging. So right here, this image doesn't do it too well. The upper right-hand image you see there, there's a whole row of Norway spruce in that image. And so as they grow upward, you may notice in some of the cemeteries around here, Mace Cemetery has a lot of Norway spruce trees. And they have been groomed on the lower branches up so that whether it was wagons or cars could pass underneath on the path through the cemetery. If they're left to their own devices, they will touch the ground. They are one of the more common evergreen species that I've seen in cemeteries around here. And also to identify it, we have the male and female cones in the lower two images. The one on the far right are the female cones. The one left of that is both the small male cones adjacent with the female cones. Another thing to note about the Norway spruce is that it has what's called whorled branches, meaning they go around the tree like the spokes of a wheel. So they all generate from the same point on the tree all the way around. This tree, they actually use as old-fashioned chewing gum. They could brew a non-alcoholic spruce beer. Other medicinal uses for the tree you can see were important to Native Americans, which probably passed on some of that medicinal knowledge to early pioneer settlers. What else can we say about this guy? He lives 300 or 400 years, so there may be a little more than halfway through their lifespans right now for those cemeteries we've been discussing. In this image, I just wanted to point out, maybe these are not Norway spruces, but if I had to guess just looking on this image, I would say either blue spruce or white spruce, which are two more common species that are planted as well. And the other perennial plants we see here are yucca plants. We'll talk about those towards the end of the program. White pine, another one. Once you recognize it, you're going to know it forever. It's so easy to identify. It was actually originated in Canada, came down south to us. It symbolizes immortality. But this tree was actually, because it grew so tall and so straight, you could get so much board feet out of that tall trunk, they would use them for shipbuilding. Plus it had a pitch or resin in it that allowed it to be somewhat waterproof. The wood's easy to work with because it is a soft wood. The needles could be used to make anything from teas to syrups to vinegars, as well as the additional medicinal uses that the plant has. This species also has both the male and female cones on it. The male cones here are located at the tips of the candles, which just means the tips of the branches. The female cones hang downward, so self-pollination occurs. These branches are whorled as just like the Norway spruce. And what I wanted to show here in these two images here, the needles are very soft, and you will notice that we'll talk about how to identify it here in a second. And the white pine has a characteristic upward growth where the tree kind of points kind of at an angle. So if you're off in the distance and you see a big tall evergreen kind of pointed off at an angle, it's probably going to be a white pine. They can get up to about 180 feet to 200 feet tall, no joke. So very tall.
The white pine, are those the ones that candle?
They candle as well, a lot of species do.
Because we've got one in the yard that is currently candling, I believe.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, I wouldn't doubt it. I haven't been up close to one recently to know if they are or not right now, but I wouldn't
And
be
is
surprised.
that the precursor just to the new cluster of needles?
Yes. Yes, sir.
So at what point in the growth do the cones appear?
The cones should appear early on in the season too. The male cones should be typically towards the top of the tree or the tips of the branches. That pollen will fall down onto the female cones and fertilize it. Then you get your cone growth from there. The good thing, the easy thing to remember about the white pine, they look soft, and they are in clusters of needles, 3 to 5 to a little cluster. Okay, 3 to 5 to a little cluster. They're 4 to 5 inches long. You're going to see them. You can use kids use them as paintbrushes. If you ever do like any STEM activities, you can use the white pine needles as paintbrushes. So very easy to identify. Look for that characteristic side shoot off the top of the tree.
Are they like sunflowers where those shoots always tend to go in the same direction?
No, I don't believe
Is that
so.
the tilt?
No. Well, I will say the only time that would be true would be in the face of prevailing winds. So if they were in an open clearing and the prevailing winds would cause it to be sculpted in the direction of the wind flow.
Well, how do they end up so tall and straight if they're always tilting?
I don't know. They don't actually tilt. It's the top of the branch that actually kind of grows that way. I don't know why. But
As the twig is bent, so grows the tree, I've heard.
I'm sorry, the what?
As the twig is bent, so grows the tree. So if the
That
twig
could
at
be
the
true,
top
too.
is bent, how?
Yeah, it's the strangest thing. Yeah, you'll have to see it. But once you recognize it in the field, you'll be like, oh yeah, that's definitely a white pine. Way over there, are we 2 miles away? That's a white pine. It has to be. Here we have a white pine in the background. I know these black and white images are harder to tell, but some of these species, if you're more familiar with them, you can still determine the species. Maybe not subspecies or anything like that, but here is a white pine in the background behind this black walnut here. You can kind of see some of the fruit still hanging on the branches. We talked about elm trees earlier too, just briefly, but this is an elm species right here. If I had to guess, I would probably say they're a slippery elm or a Siberian elm. They all have a lot of similar characteristics, but the elm trees have this vase-like shape like this. They kind of have branches that go like this. And I'm not sure about that one over there. Sugar maple. Everybody here familiar with the sugar maple? Cool. Do we all know how to identify it? Probably so, right? Okay, so we'll make this one pretty brief. This tree was popular for not only the Native Americans, but for pioneers too, because of what it could provide. Not only was a tree used as for physical things like gun stocks or furniture or shingles or whatnot, but to the Native Americans it symbolized strength and endurance. But the inner bark could also be used to make a decoction to help with as an expectorant or coughing assist. The sugar water, or the sap as we call it, was collected from trees either to make syrup or sugar, which was used in trade between the different populations of peoples. What's interesting to note here is if you see in this image, these trees, these sugar maples in that cemetery are being tapped for the sap. So there's a little tap that goes, you screw it into the tree, and it drips down into the bucket that hangs on that spigot, and you collect that sap. So these are probably, I don't know if they'd be 1 or 2 gallon buckets, but thereabouts. And it actually takes 40 gallons of sap to equal 1 gallon of syrup. So it's a very labor-intensive process. You have to spend a lot of time making this syrup or sugar come about. We can see up here the leaf. Most of us are pretty familiar with that. We know what they look like in autumn. They're gorgeous. They're on fire. They're so pretty. And they're pretty easy to tell apart even when they don't have their leaves on them because of their branching patterns. And that's a whole nother topic. So, but the lower 2 images, those are taken from our local cemetery databases, and those are sugar maples that still have a few leaves clinging to the bottoms of the leaf or the branches. It's kind of long-lived, 300 to 400 years. Tulip tree, Indiana state tree, right? It's also called the yellow poplar or the tulip poplar, even though it's not even a poplar. Symbolism was hope, rebirth, purity, or innocence. These trees grew so tall and so straight and so big that individual board feet were so long, they could use entire trees, just spans of single trees, to make mill wheels, corduroy roads, if we still remember those days, and even single span covered bridges that you know Indiana's famous for. So when you hear single span and they're talking about covered bridges, you look at those spans and those trusses in there, and it's all one complete tree. Just follow it along. The bark is very stringy and ropey, deeply furrowed on older specimens. The younger species, or the younger specimen here, these guys grow pretty fast and don't really have as long as a lifespan as I would think, but typically with trees that grow fast, they have a shorter lifespan. We know what their flower looks like. It's that orange-yellow flower. And as that flower matures and the seeds form, individual seeds will be dropped throughout the fall, which will leave on the tree spires. So you'll see these little sword-like pieces sticking up on the ends of the branches. So if you see this tree from a distance as well, hey, that's a tulip tree, right on. So they'll hold on to those through the year and then discard them in spring as the new ones grow on. The leaf, 3 lobes, simple, no teeth, no margins, anything like that. And the thing I want to mention about tulip trees, another way you can identify them from kind of far off, is their branches kind of literally almost look like they hang at 90-degree angles. So just kind of look at them structurally as they go up. They almost appear to be at 90-degree angles. The American sycamore, another one of my favorites anyway. It's native to the United States, the Midwest, North America. These guys really grow around water. They like streams, creeks, rivers, ponds, lakes, all that. So if you're ever a pioneer or a settler and you're lost in the wilderness, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do, I don't know which way's north, I don't know what I'm gonna do, but you scan your environment, if you see a sycamore tree, you know that's either gonna lead you to water, fresh source of water, or it's gonna lead you to an area where the groundwater table is fairly shallow, so you can dig for water. But most importantly, if you're lost in water, of course, is it can lead you to civilizations or settlements by following either upstream or downstream, because a lot of settlements formed on bodies of water or streams. So, another characteristic. The Native Americans called this the ghost tree because of the bark. So at the base of the tree, it has a brown exfoliating bark that exfoliates upward. As you can see in the upper right-hand image, it has a mottled appearance, that gray-white contrast, but as you go up in the branches, that sloughs off and leaves the gorgeous white naked branches that you see in the lower right-hand image. This tree is what's known as a pioneer species, meaning because it grows so fast, it can come in and quickly colonize a disturbed area and repopulate the area with that species. Some other characteristics, we don't have to go into buds or petioles or anything like that, but the seed ball is really characteristic too, because throughout the winter months, those can cling on the tree too. But that seed head is composed of individual tiny seeds that disperse throughout the year. These guys can grow pretty fast, 2 feet a year. But we'll talk about a species that can grow even faster than that. We have the northern red oak and white oaks. We know oaks used to make furniture, posts, joists, all kinds of stuff, barns. And they had different symbologies too for different peoples. But what I wanted to point out here is I listed both red oak and white oak, northern red oaks and white oaks, because there are so many oaks, it's crazy. White oak, rounded lobes. Red oak, pointed lobes. So that's the main characteristic difference between them. They both share some of the same symbolism, the same medicinal purposes, as well as the nut being edible. So pioneers and Native Americans actually would get the nut out of the shell, boil it, dry it out, powder it down, and make it into a flour substitute. So it was very important culturally for people for a variety of reasons. Here's just, I noticed there was a couple oak species in the background. I can tell by the structure and the familiarity of the trees that I'm knowledgeable in. Weeping willow tree, you see these a lot in different cemeteries. In particular, this image here is taken from Arlington Cemetery. It's a species that was native to China, but now is naturalized here. Naturalization just means that it can grow in the wild uninhibited and not have any barriers keeping it from reproducing successfully. It was a symbol of grief and mourning, as well as endurance and love. The branches were so fine that they were used for just a little bit of things, not a whole lot, like flutes or even paintbrushes. But what's important to know about the willow tree is that during the Civil War, it was of high importance because the bark from this tree, not during the Civil War, I'm thinking of another tree, we'll get to that in a minute, but the bark was used as a pain reliever and a fever reducer. The other tree I'm thinking of is, give me a second here, dogwood tree, Civil War, we'll get there. But the leaves are very characteristic. I'm sure all of you have seen a weeping willow and you know that's a weeping willow, so we'll just kind of leave it at that. These guys grow really fast, but again, because they grow really fast, they have a short lifespan. So they'll mature and be done in about 50 years. Holly. All right, now we're going back to a European species. This plant, protection and goodwill, peace. Babies used to be baptized with leaves from a holly tree to offer them greater protection. It was thought that Christ actually wore a crown from the holly tree, the thorns of the holly tree. But as far as a commercially valuable wood, there really is no market for it other than for like chess pieces or piano keys, really small things. Different uses medicinally for this plant as well. Purple dye can be extracted from the red berries. You can eat the berries, though I would highly suggest you cook them well beforehand. It has an upright growth form, however, it's really irregular in shape. It is an evergreen, so it's going to keep those shiny, glossy green leaves all year long. They have sharp points, sharp teeth, that's what we call them, teeth on the leaves, so they will prick you, they do bite, and they don't really live an incredibly long period of time. We just got a couple more here, and then we're going to finish up, okay? So shagbark hickory. This was a symbol of the pioneer age. If you lived in the Midwest, this was definitely like a tree everybody really appreciated. Native Americans used it for a lot of different things. One of the things I wanted to mention about the shagbark hickory, and hickories in general, they're hardwood, which means it's a very dense wood, very tightly packed pores. So that wood was valuable as a firewood because it burns so hot and so slowly. Those BTUs really, you could use less wood and heat longer using hickory wood. You can extract a dye from the husk of the nut, green or yellow, depending on how long you let it boil. The leaflets, the leaf, is what's called a compound leaf, meaning it's one single leaf stalk, but it's composed of leaflets. So leaflets make up the one leaf that you're seeing there. Typically has 5 to 7 leaflets on that stem. But what's most notable about the shagbark hickory is the bark exfoliates down, up, and away, just like that. This bark could actually be honed down into shorter strips that can be used for cordage, so another reason this tree was important, along with its medicinal uses. You can eat the nuts, definitely. You can also make syrup from hickory trees, so another source of syrup. They have a decent life expectancy up to 350 years. And I just wanted to mention this one here too, because in the front we see here's a red cedar, and over in the far right image is a young shagbark hickory. All right, so American beech. I love these trees. They're beautiful. They're native to North America. Truth, knowledge, and wisdom. Beech is great for furniture and flooring, as well as firewood. Again, it's a hardwood. These guys are really slow growing, so they'll live quite a while. Different parts of the plant were used for different ethnobotanical uses. It has a small leaf with a wavy leaf margin and slightly toothed, so it has a little prick at the tip of all these little wavy leaf margins. It has an edible beech nut. It's a triangular shaped nut. It's really cool. It has a little frilly triangular shaped seed pod. When you break those open, you have a little brown triangular shaped nut. It's really interesting. This species will cling to its leaves in the winter. So, say you're walking through the woods, if you've ever noticed in the winter, there's some understory trees that have orange leaves clinging to them. Probably in Indiana, they're going to be American beech trees. Another very telltale sign that you're looking at a beech tree is that smooth, characteristic gray bark up in the right-hand corner. If you've ever gone hiking in, say, state parks in Indiana, and you see all those trees that have been graffitied with initials, every one of those are American beech trees. They have such a thin bark, they cannot create a callus to heal the wound where they've been carved on the bark. So they're scarred for life. They can't heal from that. A lot of species can because they have that thicker, corky bark, but American beech cannot. And the buds too, if you still don't know, they have a really long, orange, overlapping scaled bud. They look like little swords on the tips of the branches. And I think this is our last one. We got a couple more slides, but the flowering dog one. This is the one I mentioned during the Civil War was very important because they used the bark to make a quinine substitute to help with battling malaria during the Civil War. It was also used to treat different disorders too, but this tree also had symbolism for the Christians in that they thought that the tree, the wood that Christ was crucified upon, came from the dogwood tree, and that after he was crucified, the dogwood never grew very large so that no more crosses could be made from the dogwood tree. It's used for a variety of purposes too, has a different symbolism. As far as identification, they will have, typically, the flowering dogwood is typically white. You may have some landscape cultivars that have been bred to be pink, but the ones we're talking about are a lower understory tree found throughout Indiana. So if you're traveling down south in the spring and you see these gorgeous flowering smaller trees in the woods, but no leaves, you're looking at a dogwood tree. They have a single entire leaf with parallel leaf veins that run down the leaf. That's characteristic of a dogwood. They have bulbous buds. They're kind of like a pinkish tinge. So later in the fall, even when the leaves fall off, if you see that big onion type bud sitting on that tree, it's almost a telltale sign you're looking at a dogwood. They also have a layered branching effect, so they appear layered in the branching, and they're rather open, canopied. They don't have a very long lifespan because they are a short-lived species, so they only live about 80 years. Here's just one more. I like this image of Cornstalk Cemetery because you can definitely see the cemetery back here, but these walnuts that have come in, I would be hard-pressed to say which came first, the cemetery or those trees. And then over here on the right-hand side is an American sycamore. And finally, we just got a couple slides. We're going to hit up on some herbaceous perennials now. So no more trees, no more evergreens, no more deciduous. We're going to talk about some of these species here that we also see commonly planted in cemeteries. So yuccas up here, yucca in bloom. I listed some of the different things that were symbolized or uses for said plants. I won't go through those, I'll just show those up here. But I wanted to point out that the peony in the central images here, as well as down here, And we also have creeping myrtle. It's a deciduous evergreen ground cover that, not deciduous, it's an evergreen ground cover that can quickly overtake areas. So it's kind of got to be managed. It's also known as Vinca minor, and it's Latin. English ivy, that's a really popular one too. I didn't list anything for these two because they're not native to North America, so I just left out uses on those since culturally they didn't carry over. Virginia creeper down here in the corner. A lot of people think that they see that and they go, oh, poison ivy, oh, poison oak. No, it's neither. Completely benign, won't hurt you, won't harm you. You can actually ingest it if you wanted to. But these species were common in historic pioneer cemeteries too. And then our second to last slide here, lily of the valley. And it was also used in grave markers too. We have iris here. We have wild rose, which have a lot of medicinal properties too. And finally, ferns. So that's just a little bit about landscape plants of early cemeteries. And if you're going to do any new plantings, cemeteries have a lot of rules and regulations, and I don't even know them, but I know that you can and cannot do certain things on burial grounds. But if you were to do any future plantings and there weren't already guidelines set aside for said cemetery, you want to consider the location of where you want to plant something. And not only that, but you need to know what kind of species you're going to plant there. What's its size going to be at maturity? Is it going to be any maintenance issues like dead branches, or I need to prune a lot, or it's structurally weak, or it's going to have a lot of fruit and nut problems. So in these images here, you can see how some landscape plantings have gotten out of control because these things they didn't know these things, they weren't considered then. So that's just some information to kind of put forward. But that's really all I have for you tonight. I hope that was a little bit of interest to you, and I do welcome any questions at this time. Yes, sir.
Have you ever heard of Constitution Grove?
I have not.
Okay. It's in Crane, Naval, and it's a grove of white pine trees, and it's used to refurbish the USS Constitution.
Yes, I
Did you know
have
about
heard
that?
that. Yes,
Okay.
I do know that now.
Okay.
My dad was telling me about that. That is fascinating.
Is that fascinating?
It is.
That the Navy has set aside a grove for refurbishing the only wooden boat that's in commission.
That's fascinating.
So,
I heard that the British, at some point, maybe in the 1800s, I'm not sure exactly when, they started running out of
Yes.
tall, straight
yes,
wood for masts.
yeah.
And so they started bringing
That's why we were
old
important.
tree trunks from America.
That's
over
why
to-
we were very important.
Yeah, and northern Michigan, I think, contributed a whole bunch of these
Yeah, the old
tall
Navy,
white pines.
the captains of the ships, they would go and look and, hey, there's a nice wind blowing, and they'd plant these white pine seedlings, I guess, whatever, because they knew when you build a ship, you somewhat need a curve, and the white pines were good at that.
And there are
Not
some,
only being strong, but they would curve a little bit.
and there are some boats that were plying Lake Michigan, I guess, that sank with full cargoes of white pine.
Oh my.
And they're at the bottom about 300 feet down, and they're still pristine condition. And nowadays, that old growth is worth a whole lot of money
Oh,
if
I'm
you
sure
can
it
salvage
does.
them.
I'll take my fishing pole.
Sassafras, was that ever used?
Yeah.
Oh, I can tell you all about sassafras, but I don't know what they use it for, only what I would use it for. Yes, sir.
The cedar trees have blueberries.
Yes.
Is there a way to, anything to spray on those trees to keep them from producing those berries?
I don't know if they could spray them to keep them from producing the berries. They might be able to breed it out of them, though.
You know, I've got one that's
Oh, yeah, I don't know if you can do
10 or
anything
12
to
feet
inhibit it.
across, and those berries are very fertile.
Are they?
They just, yeah, they pop up all over the bird spread too.
The red cedar is, yes, can be what's the word I'm looking for? They can outcompete a lot of native species, so they can spread a lot faster. It can colonize itself easily on disturbed sites as well, so it will germinate just about anywhere. So yeah, I don't think you could spray anything to keep it from fruiting. That might be a question for a certified arborist though. They might be able to answer that for you. Or even possibly you can contact the DNR too, Division of Forestry, about those questions. They have pest and disease information available. So that might be a possibility.
Going along with the forest or just preserving the wood for the pole iron sites. I think there's another grove somewhere in the south of live oak that they use for that. And
I'm not familiar with that, but I wouldn't be surprised.
the live oak is used because all its weird shapes.
Yeah, because of the shape, right.
It had all the forms, natural curves and things, and it's harder than
Yeah. Strong material.
cannonballs bounce off it.
Exactly.
That's pretty hard. Yes, sir.
Have you ever seen fruit trees growing in a cemetery?
Have I ever seen fruit trees?
Fruit trees, yeah,
I've
like cherry
seen
tree. apple.
Fruitless pear trees. I say fruitless even though the fruit's about that big. They call them fruitless pear trees.
Okay.
The Bradford pears, the columnar pears, all those nasty pears. I'm thinking of, the Beckville Cemetery. I don't remember the name of it. They have a whole row of fruitless pear trees that grow there. They call them fruitless in the landscaping business because they've bred them where they don't produce the pears as we know them, but they're very small. There's no value. I don't even think wildlife really eats them that much, but they're a poor species to plant anywhere, just saying. So, other fruit trees? No, I haven't.
Is a cherry tree native to?
Yes, black cherry tree is native to Indiana.
Okay.
I didn't put that one in here. There was actually, I don't know if I left that slide in or not. Yeah, I did. It was one of the first slides. There was a black cherry. I didn't point it out, but it was listed down there.
Okay.
It is native to the Midwest and North America.
Okay.
A lot of uses for that too. All parts of it are poisonous except for the fruit, which if prepared properly can be ingested for a variety of purposes, culinary and otherwise. Very valuable as a lumber, furniture, gorgeous grain, gorgeous wood.
Burns
Very easy
hot.
to identify though in the field. Once you look at the bark, you go, oh, I know that's a black cherry.
Okay.
Black cherries are
Well, thank you again very much. I appreciate being here tonight. Dylan.
Stephanie is letting us use a PowerPoint, and so we will be doing the video and PowerPoint. Hopefully have us the end of the week, but I'm learning the editing, so give me a little break.
Yeah.
I have a bold side, because that's why I asked about